Okay, so today I have volume 2 of the Yamamoto Premium Paper Fountain Pen Friendly Paper Collection, and I'll put a link if you haven't seen the first video for this yet. I did volume 1 recently, so check the little card that'll pop up at the top, and also the link will be in the description to video 1. This is going to be a very similar video, but trying the 5 papers that come in this volume 2 pack. So I'll use a similar methodology, the same pen, so that way I can show all 10 papers when it's all said and done. So let's get started. In case you haven't seen the first video yet, just to give an overview, this is 5 different Yamamoto papers that each one is all bound in this same book, and there's a brief description about the paper, its weight, kind of what its purpose was, why it was created, and the history on it. And it goes through each of those. So what I'll do is I've already pulled a sheet of each of these, and I have them labeled in the top corner with what the paper is, and I'll go through each of the papers and do all the writing off camera and then come back and talk about them. And I will read through and kind of give a summation of the description of each paper, and there will be tags in the video description so you can skip ahead or go back and reference the different papers. So let's get started. Okay, so just a quick reminder on the pens we're using. We have a TWSBI 580 with Colorverse Pulsar Pulse in an extra fine nib. We have the pens by Pasquale Merlin with Blue River by Robert Oster, made for Vanness. And this is a Bach fine nib. We have a medium nib TWSBI Eco with a Roshizuku Kosumosu in it. We have a TWSBI 580 with a broad nib, and this has Pelikan Edelstein Onyx in it. We have a Lamy 2000 extra fine in stainless with a Roshizuku Shinkai, an Opus 88 Omar that has Teranishi Guitar Gentle Green in it, and this is also an extra fine nib. And then the Asveen J16, which has the Yovo extra fine, and this has the Roshizuku Cyan Gyo. And then for the ink swatch, we have the Teranishi Guitar Gentle Green that I'll be using a glass dip rod to do a swatch at the bottom so we can see if it's able to change colors. So let's get started and look at the writing. Okay, so let's get started here with number 1. This is called Light Force, and this is a 68 GSM paper, and this is a bulky, lightly coated paper, originally based off an existing paper called Snow Force. So you got the Snow Force and the Light Force. This was originally made for full-color magazines and offers high whiteness, some texture, and natural photo reproduction. It talks about from their writing test, it does take longer for the ink to dry on this paper, but it showed good color rendition. The nib does not glide excessively over the surface and offers a pleasant, firm writing experience, and no bleeding even when written with oil-based permanent markers. So let's look at our writing sample for number 1, Light Force, 68 GSM. Okay, so number 1, Light Force, the 68 GSM. On the writing for this, it did have a smooth paper. You can see, let me get it here. You can see some of the sheen on the Pulsar Pulse, which is a sheener. Everything else, there's no real feathering of any sort that I can see. The Teranishi Gentle Green was able to do its color change over, and it had a nice fade across. In terms of the back of the paper, fully usable even on the back of the swatch, but with that kind of thickness of paper, you'd almost expect it. So number 1, Light Force, was a nice performing paper just from a cursory writing sample view. From all the nibs, you can see the size go up. So let's take a look at paper number 2. Okay, so paper number 2 is called Slight, and this is an 81.4 GSM. And let's see, this talks about, this was originally developed for adult coloring books. It says here, ink writing test conducted by Yamamoto Paper, even with low viscosity ink, stayed firmly on the paper without bleeding to the other side. People who like a little texture on their paper will enjoy the feedback of this. So let's take a look at our writing sample of number 2, Slight, 81.4 GSM. Okay, so paper number 2 was the one called Slight, and it's the 81.4 GSM. And let me get over to the side camera here. This is another one that performed really well, kind of as expected. You can see a little bit of the sheen on the Pulsar Pulse. Everything else kind of walked up like you would expect. You can even see on this one, it picks up some of the sheen that can be present in Shinkai. You can see that there on the L in Lamy. There's a slight touch of what, I don't know if that's, it looks like the bottom part of the L in Lamy did have the slightest little bit of feather, possibly. I did my best to not put fingerprints on this when doing the writing, and I don't think I mentioned, but I was using blotter paper under my hands just to remove any oils. The gentle green was able to do its color change, kind of as expected, and in terms of the back, once again, fully usable, double-sided sheet of paper, thicker. Once again, especially with this, an 81.4, you'd definitely expect to be able to use both sides of that. But overall, this was a nice, kind of standard writing sample. And, even looking at that L in Lamy a little closer, I think that might have just been, I did a double stroke on it. I don't think it even really feathered. So that was number 2, 81.4 GSM, Slight. Okay, so number 3 is called Celeste. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. This is a 65 GSM. And let's see, this was originally a book paper, and the origins of this paper, over time, the color or the paper would discolor, so they created this with a different formulation so that it would hold its color and not change over time. There are 4 different color options you can choose for this, and it talks about for the writing test they conducted, even with low viscosity ink, it stayed firmly on the paper without bleeding to the other side. There's a slightly rough surface, which provides a wonderful feel when writing, and that it absorbs ink well and colors are expressed deeply. So let's take a look at our writing sample for paper number 3, Celeste, 65 GSM. Okay, so this is number 3, the Celeste, 65 GSM. And now this one is a little bit of a cream color, and like it said in the description, this paper is produced in 4 different colors. And, from the overhead view, everything looks normal. And let me get to the side camera here, kind of like you'd expect. Now, I don't really see the same sheen in the Pulsar Pulse on this paper that I did on the others. You can see the nib sizes walking up. Now, the broad nib, it did, kind of expand a little bit more than I think it did on some of the other papers. Not feathering, but just a little bit of a thicker line. So you don't really see in the Shinkai or in the Cyangyo any kind of sheen, really. And even the swatch, it's a little bit more of a flatter color. It did do the color change, but it's flatter than the others, and I don't know if the camera's going to pick that up adequately. But overall, I personally am not a big cream paper fan, so I would love if they would have included this in all 4 color varieties. But I'm sure I could track down one of the other colors if I really wanted to for this. So that was number 3, Celeste, 65 GSM. Let's take a look at number 4. Okay, so paper number 4 is called Sheep Clouds Bond, and this is a 70 GSM paper. This is one that some local people have described as a good potential replacement for bank paper, which has recently been discontinued. This paper is made using only virgin pulp sourced from forests that are properly managed and protected to preserve the sea and land, and it does not contain fluorescent dyes. And this is one of the few descriptions where it doesn't really talk about their writing testing, so let's do our own. Sheep Clouds Bond number 4, 70 GSM. Okay, so here we have number 4, the Sheep Clouds Bond, 70 GSM, and this did have a feeling very similar to bank paper. I would agree with, where that has been said. It felt like writing on bank paper, and the performance is very similar. Now, on this, I feel like, and you see it on here, I feel like even on bank paper, the extra fine, the Colorverse Pulsar Pulse on the top, it almost sized it down a little bit versus the others. And when I do all 5 papers next to each other, we can really take a look at that. But it feels like each of these, it sized the nib down slightly when doing the writing sample. Now you can see the sheen on the Pulsar Pulse, the Shinkai, and even on the Cyangyo on this one. So no feathering. And this one did have the expected color change. And on this one, I almost feel like the green is a little bit more vibrant. I'm going to just grab another one of these. This one is the Slight. And it looks like if you look at the 2 next to each other, and let me see if the overhead camera will pick this up a little bit better here, that on the Sheep Cloud Bond, it's a little bit more green than it is blue. There's a little bit more blue hues in the Slight. So just interesting to see how the slight color variation on there. But overall, the Sheep Cloud Bond, I could see this being a decent replacement if you're a big fan of the bank paper. 70 GSM. So let's take a look at the final one, number 5. Okay, number 5 is called Smooth Art Paper, and this is the thickest paper of all the ones I've tested so far. It's 104.7 GSM. And the Smooth Art Paper has a coating of white pigment on the surface of the base paper. It's the components of the pigment are a clay, a calcium carbonate, which is limestone, and it's a raw material used for ceramics. The writing test says Yamamoto paper, the smooth writing experience was enjoyed and no bleed through. However, some inks, particularly light color dye-based inks, showed slight bleeding and bleed through. So please try using various inks and enjoy the writing experience. So they self-profess that this is going to be very ink dependent. So you're going to have to make sure that you experiment on this before putting it to use. But let's take a look at the writing sample. Smooth Art Paper. This is number 5, 104.7 GSM. Okay, so the final one of Volume 2, the Smooth Art Paper, and this lived up to its name. Writing on this was a very different experience than the other papers. You did feel the pen gliding across the page. Now, on this one, I feel like colors are definitely different. And, I mean, we'll get to the swatch, but even starting with the individual writing samples, the Colorverse Pulsar Pulse shows up differently. The Kosamosu is darker. It's not as light of a pink on this. The black showed kind of, as expected. But, the gentle green, as you can tell from the writing and the swatch, I'm glad I did this. I didn't know if any of these papers would do the effect, but this is very similar effect to what I've seen before on Ireful with this particular ink. Is when this ink goes down, it goes on in this nice teal color, but, this is the paper before it. That's the same ink. You'd be kind of hard-pressed to look at those two and go, oh yeah, that's the same ink. That's how different the paper is, and why it's always very important to swatch on what you plan on writing on. So, paper or color fastness aside, the color sits on there very well. It is just something you'd definitely want to be aware of if you're using this for something that requires colors to end up in a certain hue, like painting or art. Something you'd want to be aware of here. But overall, it was nice to write on. I did like the texture. This is the thickest paper of all of them, but not so thick that I couldn't see through to the line guide that I had underneath that Yamamoto provides with I was just using the thin lines here. They also have grid on the back, but, number 5, Smooth Art Paper. And now let's get them all together and look at a side-by-side comparison. Okay, so here we have all 5 papers. The Light Force, the Slight, the Celeste, the Sheep Cloud Bond, and the Smooth Art Paper from left to right. And when you look at the side-by-side comparison, you definitely, the first thing that pops out to me is the color swatch, obviously, where it looks blue and not green. The rest of it looks very similar, as you'd expect. Now, it does look like I mentioned on this Cloud Bond, the lines are a little bit thinner there. And let me hold up, let's do this number 3, because of the paper color might show it a little better. That line is just slightly thinner on this number 4 Sheep Cloud Bond than it is on the other. And let me hold it up to the side camera here just to see if that gets a little bit different view. Yeah, so you can see it's slightly thinner on all of these. When you have the side-by-side, it really pops out like the third one down with that pink ink. You can really see that it's not a massive change, but on the two TWSBIs, ink number 3 and 4, the medium and the broad, it definitely sizes down the nib by a size. So just something to be aware of if you're selecting your pen and ink combo before you would be using something like this. But overall, this was a good test, very similar results, and I'm very glad that I decided to do the ink swatch just for the chance that one of them would do like this Smooth Art Paper did and show a completely different color than the rest of them. And even when, in terms of the other ones here, that the Gentle Green was able to kind of do its color change, the white papers, you can see the green, like these two, the color fastness is just a little bit different. Not a massive difference, but just enough to be noticeable if you're looking for it. Some of that's going to, of course, be by how the ink went down with the glass rod when putting it on there, but in an overall color sense, this looks to be a little bit more vibrant of a color on this Light Force. The cream paper, that's hard to tell because you're not looking at like to like. This, you can see a little bit more of the blues in the Slight. Not, obviously not staying blue like on the smooth art paper, but just enough to be noticeable. So, this is a cool experiment. If you haven't bought one of these, they're like 25 bucks. And I did pick this up at Vanness, and I do want to mention, you can use the code DWRDNET to save 10% off your Vanness order. So that would make this a little bit more appealing to add into one of your future orders, just to be able to do this kind of paper experimentation, or, because these all rip out, they're all bound in the same one. You could get some envelopes and, write different letters. This is a nice way to try before you commit to buying a 50-pack sheet of one of these in A4 and having to cut it down, or if you wanted to make your own notebooks. It just gives you a little bit of trial and error time. So do me a favor and go on and click on subscribe. I'm trying to get to the point where I can have the channel be a little bit more self-sustaining, and that really would help. And if you like these paper videos, Gentleman Stationer recently got in some of the other Yamamoto that are not necessarily a fountain pen friendly paper sets, so there's a good chance I'll be picking up some of those as well to do a smaller scale test, since those are not all A5. They come in different size and varieties, but look for that on the channel in the future. Other than that, thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.